What I'm going to show you here is how to use a controller on your controller keyboard to control the software fader that we talked about in the last tutorial, which is enabling the control of several target parameters. What we want to do in this tutorial is be able to record those messages in a track in Logic so that we can create a recording of that data and edit it if we choose. What I've done here to start with is brought in the physical input object, which normally is housed on a layer called the click and ports layer. And I brought that in by just going to the new menu and selecting physical input. And once I did that, I also brought in the sequencer input. Same thing, just go to the menu and select the sequencer input. But what I've done is I put a transformer in between the two. This transformer I've set up to change the messages from, in this case I'm using the mod wheel on my keyboard, to fader messages. So that's done by the first category here, choosing everything that equals a controller and fixing those messages to become fader messages. Now the second part of this is that the fader messages that we want to create are the same type that the software fader was producing. So the software fader itself was producing channel 2 parameter number 1 messages. So we can do that with the transformer here. We can make this transformer turn our messages into fader messages, channel 2 parameter number 1, with the same fix process here. And we're good to go. Now, those messages will be recorded into the sequencer in the typical way that when you're recording in Logic, you're recording messages from the physical input into the sequencer. So now what we're going to do is we need a receptacle or a track that we can record those messages on. To make a track for those messages, I've chosen the simplest object in Logic's environment, the one called instrument. Now when you select the instrument object, it normally has a port assignment because it's normally used to send messages out to the outside world to a hardware MIDI device. So that's what this object is here. This is an object called instrument. Now the reason we use this object is so that we have an object available in our arrange page when we want to create a track for that set of messages that we're going to be creating. We would see that object show up in our library of MIDI objects here. Since I created that object in the environment, it becomes visible here when you select a MIDI data track. And now this object becomes the track that you will record those messages on. I'll just review the setup here. Physical input through the transformer to the sequencer, selecting the object on the sequencer, the instrument that we will use to record those messages on. Now we can complete the hookup, which is we can have the instrument's virtual cable go to the fader object itself. That's basically the setup. We're going to be able to move our mod wheel, which I'm doing now, and you can see that it controls the fader, and subsequently the fader messages are coming out these cables, being transformed in the same manner that I discussed in the last tutorial, which is to transform the fader messages into messages which target specific parameters on our plugins. There's one more detail that we have to attend to make this whole thing work. When we called up an instrument from the new menu, it defaulted to channel 1. Now, even though we're using the transformer between the physical input and the sequencer input, and the transformer is changing our mod wheel messages to channel 2 messages, the instrument object is going to change the channel of those messages en route to the fader to the channel value that is set here. So you can either change that channel value to channel 2 to match the channel value of the fader, or you can set the channel value of the instrument object to all. In that case, because we're using a transformer to change our mod wheel values into channel 2 values, the channel value will be retained by the messages as they get recorded onto the instrument track and simultaneously pass through to the fader object. Here's a musical example where I've used this process. In this case, I'm using the fader and the transformers to be attached to an aux object instead of the actual output bus. Now, the whole process works the same. The reason why I used the aux object was so that I could have other track instruments avoid this audio signal path so that they could go directly out to the stereo out. All right, so enjoy this piece and look forward to talking to you on the next tutorial.